It was the summer of 2017, in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of place where life moved at a slow, comfortable pace. Neighbors greeted each other while watering their lawns, and weekends were filled with barbecue cookouts and kids playing in the cul-de-sac until the streetlights came on. It was picture perfect, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. This is where our protagonist, Ethan Carter, lived with his wife of 10 years, Melanie, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Olivia and 5-year-old Lucas. Ethan was the epitome of a hard-working family man. At 36, he had built a respectable career in real estate, earning the trust of his community with his honesty and knack for finding people their dream homes. He was the kind of guy who remembered birthdays, showed up early for PTA meetings, and made a point of coaching his son's little league team, even when work got hectic. Melanie, on the other hand, was the social butterfly of the family. A former event planner turned stay-at-home mom, she had an energy about her that drew people in. She was effortlessly charming, always the life of the party, and known for organizing the best neighborhood gatherings. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were the perfect couple, a modern-day fairy tale family. But, as Ethan was about to find out, appearances can be deceiving. The cracks began to show during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday evening. Ethan had just gotten home from a long day of showings, his tie slightly loosened, and his briefcase in hand. Melanie was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce with her phone propped against the counter. From the moment he walked in, he could tell something was off. Usually, Melanie greeted him with a smile or a peck on the cheek, but tonight, she barely glanced up. "Long day?" Ethan asked, attempting to break the ice as he set his briefcase down and kissed Olivia on the head. She was coloring at the dining table, completely immersed in her latest masterpiece. Melanie nodded, her response curt. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has bad days, right? But as the weeks went by, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. Melanie, who used to light up when he walked into the room, now seemed distracted, aloof, even. She spent more time on her phone, her laughter reserved for texts or calls Ethan wasn't privy to. And then there were the girls' nights. Now, don't get me wrong, Ethan wasn't the overbearing type. He respected Melanie's independence and never batted an eye when she needed time with her friends. But these outings were happening more frequently. What started as once-a-month dinners had turned into twice-weekly excursions. Each time she left, Ethan was left alone to tuck the kids into bed, their questions about mommy's absence gnawing at his already growing unease. It wasn't just her absence that raised red flags. The subtle changes in her appearance were impossible to ignore. Melanie had always been stylish, but lately, her outfits for these so-called girls' nights were different. Shorter dresses, plunging necklines, a little more makeup than usual. Ethan noticed the new perfume, too. A bold, sultry scent that clung to her even after she returned home, hours past midnight. Still, Ethan wanted to believe in his wife. After all, they had built a life together. A life filled with shared dreams, late-night conversations, and 2 beautiful kids. He told himself it was a phase, maybe even a midlife crisis. But deep down, a nagging doubt had started to take root. Everything came to a head one Friday evening. Melanie had announced earlier that week she'd be meeting her friends for dinner at a trendy new spot downtown. Ethan offered to watch the kids without hesitation, thinking nothing of it. But as the hours ticked by and midnight came and went, Ethan's worry turned to frustration. When Melanie finally walked through the door at 1:30 a.m., the tension in the room was palpable. Her cheeks were flushed, and she reeked of alcohol and that unmistakable new perfume. Ethan, who had been sitting on the couch waiting for her, stood as she entered. "You're late," he said, his voice calm but edged with concern. Melanie waved him off, stumbling slightly as she kicked off her heels. "It was a long dinner. Don't start. Don't start," Ethan repeated, his brow furrowing. "Melanie, it's almost 2 in the morning. You could have at least texted." She sighed, exasperated. "I'm a grown woman, Ethan. Do I really need to check in every time I go out?" Her words stung, but Ethan held his ground. "This isn't about checking in. It's about respect. I was worried about you. She rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath as she disappeared upstairs, leaving Ethan alone in the silence of the living room. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the nagging doubt in his chest grew heavier. Something wasn't right. The next morning, things felt strained. Melanie was unusually quiet, avoiding Ethan's gaze as they ate breakfast with the kids. Olivia picked up on the tension, asking innocently, "Is Mommy mad at Daddy?" Ethan forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired." But the truth was, Ethan wasn't sure what Melanie was anymore. And that uncertainty gnawed at him like a splinter he couldn't remove. Later that week, while Melanie was out running errands, Ethan found himself in their shared home office, sorting through some paperwork. That's when he noticed her laptop sitting on the desk, its screen glowing softly. A notification popped up, an email from someone named Chris. Ethan's heart sank as he read the subject line. Last night was incredible. For a moment he froze, his mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe Chris was just a friend. But the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. He clicked on the email, his hands trembling. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Ethan's eyes darted across the screen as his breath caught in his throat. The email from Chris wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It was a snapshot of betrayal, undeniable proof that something was happening behind closed doors, or, in this case, behind Ethan's back. The words were simple yet laced with intimacy. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Let me know when we can do it again. The weight of the message felt suffocating. Ethan's mind raced. Who was Chris? How long had this been going on? 100 questions flooded his thoughts, but one emotion overpowered them all: hurt. The woman he had loved for over a decade, the mother of his children, had been sharing moments with someone else. Moments that should have been theirs alone. But Ethan wasn't one to jump to conclusions without evidence. He spent the next hour combing through Melanie's laptop, carefully skimming emails, messages, and social media accounts. It didn't take long to find more breadcrumbs. A few flirtatious texts, photos exchanged late at night, and a calendar entry for a business meeting that coincided with one of her so-called girls' nights. His heart ached as he pieced it together. Chris wasn't a friend or a colleague. He was someone Melanie had been seeing for months. The realization hit him like a freight train, and for a moment, he sat there in stunned silence, his head in his hands. The confrontation came sooner than Ethan expected. That evening, as the kids played upstairs, Ethan and Melanie found themselves alone in the kitchen. The air between them was thick with tension, and Ethan decided he couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Melanie," he began, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She glanced up from her phone, her expression guarded. "About what?" Ethan hesitated, his mind replaying the evidence he had uncovered. "I saw an email on your laptop. From Chris." Her face paled, and for a moment, she looked as though she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "I can explain," she said softly. Ethan crossed his arms, his voice tinged with frustration. "Please do, because right now, I'm struggling to understand how we got here." Melanie's confession was a tangled web of excuses and half-truths. She admitted to meeting Chris at a networking event a few months ago. At first, it was innocent, just a few drinks and friendly conversation. But as time went on, their interactions grew more intimate. She claimed it was never physical, just emotional. A connection she didn't feel she had with Ethan anymore. "I felt invisible, Ethan," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're always so busy with work, with the kids. I needed someone to see me, to make me feel alive again." Ethan's jaw tightened, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "And you didn't think to talk to me about that? To tell me how you were feeling before turning to someone else?" Melanie looked away, guilt etched across her features. "I didn't know how." The conversation ended with more questions than answers. Ethan slept on the couch that night, his mind replaying every moment of their marriage, searching for signs he might have missed. He wasn't perfect, he knew that, but he had always tried to be a good husband, a good father. Was that not enough? The following days were a whirlwind of tension and avoidance. Melanie promised to cut off all contact with Chris, swearing she wanted to rebuild their marriage. But Ethan wasn't sure if he could trust her anymore. The betrayal lingered like a shadow, casting doubt on every word she said. Ethan decided he needed clarity, and that meant taking matters into his own hands. One evening, while Melanie was out, he installed a GPS tracker on her car. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. He hated the idea of spying on his wife, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. For a few days, the tracker revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Melanie went to the grocery store, picked up the kids from school, and attended a yoga class. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, the tracker showed her car parked at a coffee shop across town, a place she had no reason to be. Ethan's heart raced as he pulled up the app on his phone, watching the blinking that represented her car. He debated whether to confront her immediately or wait and see what she was up to. Ultimately, curiosity won out, and he decided to drive to the coffee shop himself. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Through the window, he spotted Melanie sitting at a small corner table, laughing with a man who could only be Chris. They leaned in close, their body language unmistakable. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched them, the betrayal cutting deeper than he thought possible. He didn't go inside. Instead, he drove home, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could she promise to end things with Chris and then meet him like this? Did their marriage mean so little to her? That evening, Ethan confronted Melanie once again. This time, there was no room for denial. He described exactly what he had seen at the coffee shop, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I thought you said it was over," he said, his eyes locked on hers. Melanie's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I wanted to end it, I swear. But I couldn't. He makes me feel things I haven't felt in years, Ethan." Her words felt like a dagger to his heart. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "What about us, Melanie? What about the life we've built together? The kids? Do they not matter to you?" "They do," she said through her tears. "Of course they do. But I feel like I've lost myself, Ethan. And I don't know how to find my way back." Ethan knew he was at a crossroads. He could fight for their marriage, try to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Or he could walk away, leaving behind the life he had spent years creating. Neither option felt like a victory. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Melanie tried counseling, hoping to salvage what was left of their relationship. The sessions were raw and emotional, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. Ethan learned that Melanie's infidelity wasn't just about him. It was about her own struggles with self-worth and identity. And Melanie learned just how deeply her actions had hurt Ethan, shaking the foundation of their marriage. But despite their efforts, the damage had been done. Ethan couldn't erase the image of Melanie with Chris, nor could he ignore the lingering doubt that she might betray him again. Trust, once broken, is a difficult thing to rebuild. As the weeks turned into months, it became clear that their marriage might not survive. The once lively home they had built together now felt cold and distant, a stark contrast to the love and laughter that had once filled its walls. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how it all unfolds, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Ethan's frustration grew with each passing day, the walls of his once peaceful home closing in like a cage. The counseling sessions had started with optimism, but now they felt like an exercise in futility. Melanie's remorse seemed genuine, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. Every small detail she omitted, every hesitation in her voice, felt like another crack in the fragile foundation they were trying to rebuild. Then came the day that would change everything. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when Ethan received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled him to answer. On the other end was a woman who introduced herself as Lauren, Chris's wife. Her voice was trembling but determined. "Ethan," she said, "I think we need to talk. The conversation that followed was nothing short of shocking. Lauren had suspected her husband of infidelity for months, but it wasn't until she stumbled across his hidden second phone that she found the evidence she needed. Messages, photos, and plans, all confirming his affair with Melanie. Lauren's voice cracked with emotion as she explained. "I'm not calling to hurt you, but I thought you deserved to know the full truth. They've been meeting more often than either of them has admitted." Ethan felt his stomach churn. The idea of Melanie lying to him yet again, even after promising transparency, was unbearable. But Lauren wasn't done. She revealed that Chris had mentioned plans for a getaway, a weekend trip out of town. It was scheduled for the following weekend, under the guise of a work retreat. Ethan thanked her for the call, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. As he hung up, he realized he was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was a man on a mission to uncover the full extent of the deception. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Ethan tracked Melanie's movements carefully, paying close attention to her excuses and work commitments. Sure enough, she mentioned a last-minute conference that conveniently aligned with the dates Lauren had given him. Ethan decided he needed undeniable proof, not just for himself but for any potential fallout. He contacted an old college friend, Jack, who worked as a private investigator. Jack agreed to help, setting up surveillance on both Melanie and Chris. The plan was simple: follow them, document everything, and confront Melanie with the evidence. Ethan hated the idea of stooping to such measures, but at this point, he felt he had no other choice. The weekend arrived, and Ethan's worst fears were confirmed. Jack provided him with photos and videos of Melanie and Chris checking into a quaint lakeside resort. They were all smiles, holding hands as they walked through the lobby. To Ethan, it felt like a cruel parody of their own honeymoon years ago. But Jack had also uncovered something unexpected. Chris wasn't just another man caught in an affair. He had a history, multiple women, multiple affairs, and a trail of broken relationships that stretched back years. Chris was a predator, charming and manipulative, preying on vulnerable women who felt unappreciated or lost. Ethan's anger boiled over. Melanie had fallen for a man who didn't care about her, their family, or the destruction he left in his wake. She had risked everything for a fantasy, while Ethan was left to pick up the pieces. The confrontation at the resort was inevitable. Ethan arrived late Sunday afternoon, parking his car discreetly and making his way to the cabin where Melanie and Chris were staying. His heart pounded as he approached the door, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet of the woods. Melanie answered, her face going pale as she saw him standing there. "Ethan," she stammered, stepping outside and closing the door behind her. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's voice was cold, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. "I think you know why I'm here, Melanie. Is Chris inside?" Melanie glanced nervously over her shoulder. "This isn't what it looks like," she began, but Ethan cut her off. "Don't insult me by lying," he said, his voice firm. "I know everything. I've seen the messages, the photos, the videos. I know about the plans, the lies, all of it." Melanie's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might collapse. But then, the door opened, and Chris stepped out, his expression equal parts smug and defensive. "Well, this is awkward," Chris said, crossing his arms. "I think it's time we all had a little chat." The confrontation that followed was explosive. Ethan and Chris exchanged heated words, their voices echoing through the stillness of the forest. Melanie tried to intervene, but her pleas only fueled Ethan's anger. "You think you're some kind of Casanova?" Ethan spat at Chris. "You're nothing but a liar and a cheat, preying on women who deserve better." Chris smirked, his arrogance on full display. "And what does that make you, Ethan? A husband who couldn't keep his wife happy?" The words stung, but Ethan refused to back down. He turned to Melanie, his voice softening. "Is this what you want? A man who will use you and throw you away like he's done to every other woman? Is that the future you see for yourself?" Melanie broke down, her sobs shaking her entire body. She apologized repeatedly, begging Ethan for forgiveness. But Ethan knew that words alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. Chris, sensing the tension, tried to defuse the situation. "Look, man, maybe it's time you just walk away. Melanie's not happy with you. That's not my fault." Ethan clenched his fists, his self-control hanging by a thread. "You're right about one thing, Chris. It's time I walk away. But not before I make sure Melanie knows exactly who you are." He pulled out the folder Jack had prepared, filled with evidence of Chris's past affairs and manipulations. He handed it to Melanie, who looked through it with trembling hands. Her face twisted in horror as she realized the truth. The aftermath of the confrontation was a turning point. Melanie ended things with Chris immediately, finally seeing him for the predator he was. She begged Ethan for another chance, promising to do whatever it took to rebuild their marriage. But Ethan wasn't sure if he could forgive her. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the trust they once shared felt irreparably damaged. For weeks, Ethan wrestled with his emotions. He attended counseling sessions on his own, trying to process the anger, sadness, and sense of loss. He spent more time with his kids, finding solace in their laughter and innocence. Eventually, Ethan made a decision. He sat Melanie down and explained that while he still loved her, he couldn't move past what had happened. They agreed to separate, vowing to remain amicable for the sake of their children. The divorce was painful but necessary. Ethan focused on rebuilding his life, rediscovering who he was outside of his role as a husband and father. Melanie, too, sought therapy and began to address the issues that had led her down the path of infidelity. In the end, the experience taught Ethan a valuable lesson. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair, but self-worth and resilience can be rebuilt. He emerged from the ordeal stronger, more self-aware, and determined to create a better future for himself and his children. If you've been captivated by Ethan's story and want to hear more incredible tales like this one, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. The days following Ethan's confrontation at the resort were a whirlwind of emotional turmoil. Melanie moved out temporarily, respecting Ethan's request for space, while they both reflected on their next steps. For Ethan, the quiet house was both a relief and a reminder of what he had lost. Every room seemed to echo with memories of their life together, now tainted by betrayal. But Ethan wasn't the only one dealing with the fallout. Melanie's breakdown at the resort was only the beginning. She spiraled into a deep guilt, reaching out to Ethan with long, heartfelt messages that he often left unread. Meanwhile, Lauren, Chris's wife, confided in Ethan that she had finally confronted Chris and filed for divorce. Chris, true to his nature, was already attempting to charm his way into another woman's life, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. Ethan's focus shifted inward. He threw himself into his work, determined to maintain some sense of normalcy. His colleagues, noticing his distraction, offered their support, though Ethan kept the details of his personal life private. His evenings were spent with his kids, who became his anchor during the storm. Their innocence and joy reminded him that, no matter what, he had a purpose beyond the heartbreak. One night, as Ethan was helping his youngest daughter with her homework, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Jack, the private investigator. The message read, "Need to talk. Urgent. Call me ASAP." Ethan stepped outside, dialing Jack's number. The line connected quickly, and Jack's tone was serious. "Ethan, I found something. Something big." "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "It's Chris. The guy isn't just a serial cheater, he's dangerous. He's been manipulating Melanie far more than we realized. I've uncovered messages where he threatened to expose private details about her to her employer if she didn't keep seeing him." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Are you saying he blackmailed her?" "Essentially, yes," Jack confirmed. "Melanie might have been more trapped than we thought. And there's more. He's been siphoning money from her. Small amounts, but over time it adds up." Ethan's anger reignited, but this time, it was coupled with a deep sense of urgency. Chris wasn't just a womanizer. He was a predator who had manipulated Melanie into a corner. Ethan realized that confronting Chris at the resort had only scratched the surface of his true character. The climactic moment came when Ethan decided he couldn't let Chris walk away unscathed. Armed with the new evidence Jack had gathered, Ethan met with Lauren to discuss their next steps. They both agreed that Chris needed to face the consequences of his actions, not just for their sake but to prevent him from hurting others in the future. Together, they filed a formal complaint with the police, presenting Jack's findings and sharing their personal accounts of Chris's manipulation and deceit. Melanie, still desperate to make amends, agreed to cooperate as well, providing further evidence of Chris's threats and financial exploitation. The investigation moved quickly, thanks in part to the compelling evidence. Chris was arrested on charges of blackmail, fraud, and harassment. The smug arrogance he had displayed at the resort was replaced with a look of shock and disbelief as he was led away in handcuffs. For Ethan, the arrest was a turning point, but not the resolution he had hoped for. While Chris's removal from their lives brought a sense of justice, it didn't erase the pain or mend the broken trust between him and Melanie. Ethan wrestled with his feelings, torn between the love he still felt for her and the betrayal that lingered like a shadow over their marriage. One evening, Melanie asked to meet in person. Ethan agreed, unsure of what to expect. They met at a quiet park where they had often taken their kids in happier times. Melanie looked tired, her usual confidence replaced with vulnerability. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to hear me out." Ethan nodded, staying silent as she continued. "I made mistakes, terrible, selfish mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Chris made me feel seen when I was struggling, but it was a lie. He exploited my insecurities and I let him. I should have come to you instead of looking elsewhere for validation." Her words were sincere, and for the first time, Ethan saw the depth of her remorse. But the damage had been done. Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Melanie, I believe you're sorry, and I know this hasn't been easy for you. But forgiveness doesn't mean we can go back to how things were. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break. I don't know if I can rebuild that trust." Tears streamed down Melanie's face, but she nodded. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make things right, even if it means letting you go." As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and Melanie worked toward a new normal. They decided to finalize their separation but remained dedicated to co-parenting their children. The process was far from easy, but they both prioritized the well-being of their family above their personal pain. Ethan found solace in therapy, where he began to unpack the trauma of the betrayal and rediscover his sense of self. He also reconnected with old friends and hobbies, finding joy in the simple pleasures he had once taken for granted. Melanie, too, sought counseling, determined to address the issues that had led her down the path of infidelity. She began volunteering at a local women's shelter, channeling her pain into helping others who were struggling. The story reached its peak during a chance encounter. Several months after Chris's arrest, Ethan ran into Lauren at a community event. They hadn't spoken much since the case was resolved, but their shared experience had created an unspoken bond. As they caught up, Ethan realized how much they had both grown. Lauren had found peace in her decision to leave Chris, embracing her independence and focusing on her children. Ethan, too, felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. "Funny how life works," Lauren said with a small smile. "Sometimes, the worst moments lead us to exactly where we're supposed to be." Ethan nodded, her words resonating deeply. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for the future he was building for his family. If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more incredible tales of resilience and redemption. Every click helps bring these stories to life for audiences like you. Ethan's life had settled into a semblance of normalcy, but the storm hadn't fully passed. Chris's arrest and Melanie's admission had given Ethan a clearer picture of the betrayal, but the emotional weight of it all still bore down on him. He had hoped time would ease the sting, but every day brought reminders, little cracks in the foundation of his past life that hadn't yet healed. Then came an unexpected call from Jack, the private investigator. His voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Ethan," Jack began, skipping pleasantries. "We've got a new problem." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What now?" "Chris has made bail. He's out." The words hit Ethan like a freight train. How could someone like Chris, charged with blackmail, fraud, and harassment, be allowed back on the streets? The justice system's failure to keep him contained was a blow, but the real concern lay in what Chris might do next. "Do you think he'll come after Melanie?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. "I can't say for sure," Jack replied. "But men like him don't let go easily. I'd stay vigilant." Ethan couldn't ignore the warning. That evening, he sat with Melanie in a small cafe, their first face-to-face meeting since deciding to finalize their separation. The air between them was heavy, a mix of unresolved emotions and unspoken fears. Melanie looked visibly shaken when Ethan told her about Chris's release. "He's out," she whispered, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. Ethan nodded. "Jack thinks he might try to reach out, maybe even retaliate. Have you heard from him?" Melanie shook her head quickly. "No. I blocked his number after everything came out." "But Ethan, what if he doesn't stop?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm but reassuring. "We'll handle it. If he contacts you, you tell me immediately. And I've already spoken to Jack about increasing security around the house." Despite his calm demeanor, Ethan's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Chris wasn't just a narcissist. He was a calculated manipulator. And now, with his image tarnished and his future uncertain, he had nothing left to lose. The breaking point came just days later. Ethan was picking up his kids from school when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello." There was a pause, followed by a voice he recognized instantly. It was Chris. "Ethan. Long time, no talk." Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What do you want?" Chris chuckled, the sound dripping with malice. "Relax. I'm not here to start a war. Just wanted to let you know that I don't hold grudges. Melanie and I had our fun. It's over now. No hard feelings, right?" Ethan's blood boiled. "Stay away from her. Stay away from all of us." Chris's tone darkened. "Oh, I'm not the one you should be worried about, Ethan. You might want to keep an eye on Melanie. She's got a knack for getting herself into trouble." Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone, his heart pounding. Chris's words weren't just a veiled threat. They were a warning that he wasn't done meddling in their lives. That night, Ethan called Jack, detailing the conversation. Jack didn't mince words. "We need to escalate this. I'll contact the police and push for a restraining order. In the meantime, I suggest you talk to Melanie. She needs to know what we're dealing with." Ethan hesitated. Melanie had been trying to rebuild her life, focusing on therapy and her kids. Dragging her back into Chris's chaos felt cruel, but he knew it was necessary. When Ethan told her about the call, Melanie's face paled. "He's trying to scare us," she said, her voice wavering. "But why? What does he want now?" "Control," Ethan replied simply. "He thrives on it. The best thing we can do is stay united. Don't let him see us falter." The tension reached a fever pitch when Chris made his move. It was a quiet Saturday evening. Ethan had just put the kids to bed when his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, but a glance through the peephole revealed a delivery man holding a package. Relieved, Ethan opened the door. The man handed him a small box, then walked away without a word. Suspicious, Ethan brought the package inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a single envelope, its contents chilling. Photos of Melanie. Some were from years ago, happy family moments captured during vacations and birthdays. But others were recent, her walking out of her therapist's office, picking up groceries, even sitting alone at a park bench. The implication was clear. Chris had been watching her. Alongside the photos was a note. "Still think you can protect her?" Ethan's reaction was immediate and fierce. He called the police, handing over the photos and note as evidence. Jack arrived shortly after, his expression grim as he examined the package. "This changes everything," Jack said. He's escalating, trying to intimidate you. We need to act fast. Ethan agreed. Can you trace where this came from? Jack nodded. I'll try, but Chris is smart. He won't make it easy. Meanwhile, Melanie's world was unraveling. When Ethan showed her the photos, she broke down in tears. I can't believe he's doing this, she sobbed. I thought I was done with him. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, Melanie. We'll get through it together. For the first time since the affair came to light, Melanie felt a glimmer of hope. Ethan's support, despite everything they had been through, gave her the strength to keep fighting. The turning point came during a late-night stakeout. Jack had managed to trace the package's origins to a local courier service, leading them to a secluded warehouse. Ethan insisted on joining Jack and the police, unable to sit idly by while Chris continued his reign of terror. Inside the warehouse, they found evidence of Chris's twisted obsession, photos, documents, even a journal detailing his manipulations. But Chris himself was nowhere to be found. Just as they were about to leave, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of his house, taken from outside. The caption read, "Nice night for a visit, don't you think?" Ethan's heart raced as he rushed home, Jack and the police following close behind. When they arrived, they found the house untouched, but the implication was clear. Chris was still watching, still plotting. The police promised to increase patrols in the area, but Ethan knew that wasn't enough. He couldn't rely on the system to protect his family. He had to take matters into his own hands. The momentum is at its peak, and Ethan is on edge. If this story has kept you hooked, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales. The night air was thick with unease as Ethan double-checked the locks on every door and window. He couldn't shake the image of the text Chris had sent. The ominous photo of his home, a quiet but terrifying reminder that the man was always one step ahead. The police had increased patrols in the area, and Jack had set up surveillance equipment, but none of it felt like enough. Melanie was staying with her sister for the night, too afraid to return home. Ethan had offered to go with her, but she insisted he stay to protect the house and their children. He spent the evening pacing the living room, the weight of his responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. At around 11 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another text. This time it was a video, a grainy clip showing his kids playing in the backyard. His stomach lurched. Chris wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. He was targeting the most vulnerable part of Ethan's life. Jack arrived within minutes of Ethan's frantic call. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "This is where I draw the line. He's not going to get away with this." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "I've already reached out to some contacts. We're narrowing down his location. If he's close, we'll find him." As the two strategized, the tension in the house was palpable. Ethan couldn't help but glance at the surveillance monitors every few seconds, half expecting Chris to appear on one of the feeds. But the screens remained eerily empty, the silence almost mocking. Then, a motion alert flashed on the main monitor. Someone was at the gate. Ethan's heart pounded as he grabbed the nearest blunt object, a baseball bat. Jack, ever the professional, pulled out his concealed weapon and motioned for Ethan to stay back. But Ethan was past the point of caution. He had to know who was outside. Together, they approached the gate, their movements careful but deliberate. When they reached it, they found a single envelope taped to the bars. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Let's make this interesting." Back in the house, they plugged the drive into Jack's laptop. The file it contained was a video, clearly shot on Chris's phone. In it, Chris was seated in what appeared to be a warehouse, his smug grin framed by the dim glow of a single overhead light. "Ethan," Chris began, his tone oozing with condescension, "I figured it was time to settle this once and for all. You've been playing the hero, trying to protect poor Melanie and those precious kids of yours. But let's be honest, you can't win. You were always second best, Ethan. Second best husband, second best father, second best man." Ethan's hands clenched into fists as Chris continued, his voice dripping with malice. "Here's the deal. You want this to end? Come find me. Alone. Don't bother with the cops or your little PI buddy. If you want to keep your family safe, you'll do exactly as I say. The video ended with an address, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Jack immediately began calling the police, but Ethan stopped him. No, Ethan said firmly. This is between me and him. Against Jack's protests, Ethan insisted on going alone. He knew Chris was baiting him, but he couldn't risk involving anyone else and putting his family in further danger. Jack reluctantly agreed to follow from a distance, promising to intervene only if things went south. The drive to the factory felt surreal. The empty streets bathed in the cold glow of streetlights. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of what awaited him. He wasn't a fighter, but the thought of Chris endangering his family had awakened something primal inside him. He was ready to do whatever it took to end this nightmare. When Ethan arrived, the factory loomed like a shadow against the night sky. Its broken windows and rusted metal walls gave it an air of desolation, the perfect setting for Chris's twisted game. Ethan parked his car and stepped out, the baseball bat clutched tightly in his hand. Inside, the factory was a maze of empty corridors and echoing footsteps. Ethan followed the faint glow of a single light coming from a room at the far end of the building. The closer he got, the louder his heartbeat became, each step a mix of fear and determination. When he entered the room, Chris was waiting, seated on a makeshift throne of crates. He clapped mockingly as Ethan approached, his grin widening. Well, Chris drawled. Look who decided to show up. The noble Ethan, here to save the day. Ethan didn't waste time with pleasantries. What do you want, Chris? Why are you doing this? Chris shrugged, his demeanor casual. Because I can. Because it's fun. And because watching you squirm is the best entertainment I've had in years. You're sick, Ethan spat. This ends tonight. Chris stood, his expression darkening. You're right about one thing, it does end tonight. But not the way you think. The confrontation quickly escalated. Chris lunged at Ethan, a knife glinting in his hand. Ethan swung the bat, narrowly missing as Chris dodged to the side. The two circled each other, the tension crackling like static in the air. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't trained for this, but his determination outweighed his fear. He swung again, this time landing a solid hit to Chris's arm. The knife clattered to the ground, and Chris let out a pained grunt. But Chris wasn't finished. He tackled Ethan, the two of them crashing into a pile of crates. Ethan struggled to break free, his breath coming in ragged gasps as Chris's hands closed around his throat. Just as Ethan's vision began to blur, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Jack had arrived, his gun raised and his expression steely. Chris released Ethan, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. Game over, Chris, Jack said, his voice cold. The police arrived moments later, their sirens piercing the night. Chris was handcuffed and dragged away, his once cocky demeanor replaced by a look of defeat. Ethan sat on the ground, his body trembling as the adrenaline wore off. Jack crouched beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It's over, Ethan. He won't bother you again. The aftermath was a mix of relief and exhaustion. Chris was charged with multiple crimes, ensuring he would spend the foreseeable future behind bars. Ethan and Melanie began the slow process of rebuilding their lives, focusing on creating a safe and stable environment for their kids. Through it all, Ethan found a new sense of strength. The ordeal had tested him in ways he never imagined, but it also reminded him of what truly mattered: his family, his resilience, and his unwavering commitment to protect those he loved. As Ethan stood on his porch one quiet evening, watching his kids play in the yard, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. The storm had passed, and while the scars remained, they were a reminder of the battles he had fought and won. The tension has reached its peak, and the story is moving toward its resolution. If you're invested in this gripping tale, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more compelling content. As the sun set on the small town, Ethan stood on his front porch, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood. The chaos that had once engulfed his life had finally quieted, leaving room for reflection and, perhaps, a sense of relief. Chris's threats had loomed like a storm cloud for weeks, but with his arrest and the compelling evidence now in the hands of the authorities, Ethan could finally breathe. It wasn't just relief, it was freedom. Melanie stepped out to join him, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. Her expression was softer than it had been in weeks, though the tension of recent events still lingered around her eyes. "Long day?" she asked, leaning against the porch railing. Ethan smiled faintly, watching the kids play in the yard. "Not as long as it's been for the past month." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that said more than words ever could. After everything they had been through, the lies, the betrayal, and the near collapse of their marriage, they were finally on the same page again. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Chris's arrest had been the catalyst for change. His manipulation, schemes, and obsession with destroying Ethan had left a trail of devastation, but it had also forced Ethan and Melanie to confront their fractured relationship. Therapy had been Melanie's idea, and though Ethan was initially reluctant, he agreed. Sitting in those sessions, bearing their fears and vulnerabilities, they had started to rebuild trust brick by brick. Melanie set her mug down on the porch railing. "I've been thinking about everything we've gone through. About us." Ethan turned to her, sensing the gravity in her tone. "What about us?" She took a deep breath. "I think I've finally realized how much I let my own fears drive me away. Chris preyed on that, but it wasn't all his fault. I should have been honest with you from the start. And I should have seen what was happening sooner," Ethan admitted. "I was so caught up in work, in everything but us. I gave him a way in." Their hands met, fingers intertwining as they stood in the golden glow of the fading sun. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a promise to try. The community, too, had rallied around Ethan and his family. News of Chris's downfall spread quickly. Neighbors who had once been aloof now offered support, bringing meals and checking in. It was a stark contrast to the isolation Ethan had felt when Chris's lies first began to unravel his life. At work, Ethan faced the challenge of repairing his reputation. Chris's sabotage had left a mark, but the board of directors had seen the truth for what it was. They reinstated Ethan as CEO, their faith in him restored. Still, he approached his work with a new perspective, balancing it with the time he knew his family deserved. One afternoon, he called Melanie from his office. "Hey," he said, smiling into the phone. "I was thinking, how about we take a vacation? Just the four of us." Melanie's laughter on the other end of the line was a balm to his soul. "I'd love that. The kids will be thrilled." Chris, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his actions. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. With the weight of evidence against him, including recorded threats and documentation of his schemes, Chris had little room to maneuver. He was convicted on multiple charges, from fraud to attempted extortion, and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Ethan attended the sentencing, not out of malice, but for closure. As Chris was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Ethan one last time, a twisted grin on his face. It was as if he wanted Ethan to know that, even in defeat, he felt victorious. But Ethan refused to let that moment define him. Walking out of the courtroom, he felt a sense of peace. Chris no longer held power over him. Months turned into a year, and life moved on. Ethan and Melanie's marriage grew stronger, shaped by the trials they had endured. The kids thrived, their laughter filling the house once again. The shadow that had loomed over their family was gone, replaced by light and hope. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Melanie raised her glass. "To us," she said, her voice steady and full of warmth, "to family and second chances." Ethan clinked his glass against hers, smiling at their children. "And to never letting anyone or anything tear us apart again." In the end, the story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about resilience. It was about finding strength in the face of adversity and choosing love over fear. Ethan had faced his worst nightmare and come out on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. As the credits of their story rolled, Ethan and Melanie stood as a testament to the power of forgiveness, determination, and hope. And there you have it, a journey of heartbreak, redemption, and healing. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories like this one. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share the next adventure with you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.